Talking about the year end, of course, of 2024 and the review on so far the security challenges that we have had, we're going to continue and dive into the discussion. So from the resurgence of Boko Haram attacks in the northeast, of course, we have escalating cases of kidnapping, banditry, and even, from the northwest, having a lot of terrorism attack. Some major events that made headlines this year include the Lakurawa attack, while highlighting the ongoing threats of terrorism in the region. Additionally, the Kaduna train attack in March resulted in the loss of several lives and the kidnapping of many more. The northwest region also saw a surge in banditry, with many communities coming under attack and several lives were lost. Furthermore, Kano State faced another wave of public looting and vandalism, raising concerns about Governor Abubakar Yusuf's leadership and handling the security issues. The recurrence of this incident suggests a failure to address underlying issues and ensure accountability. So joining us, of course, to dissect and talk about these issues and this event is our guest and expert. Talking about a security expert, Dr. Kabir Yusuf. He is known to be a renowned security expert, and will give a deep dive into the complexities, of the security challenges. Good morning.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's hear your take on 2024, security issues and challenges. What is your assessment of it?
It's been a continuation, as it were, of several years of deterioration in our security circumstances. 2024, in summary, we did not really see any great improvement. And this is in spite of the fact that the government introduced several measures in an attempt to address the security challenge. One of the most important things that the government did is the pronouncement by the president. He gave leadership, he gave directives to the security sector, ministers and other operational heads. As an example, at least on 3 occasions, he issued directives for the security sector leadership to end banditry and bring an end to the kidnap for ransom that the bandits are engaged in. So we saw that type of direction. We also saw the introduction of new operations. I think the most obvious one that most people would relate to is the introduction of Operation Fansang Yema in the northwest of the country. And this is to address the challenge of banditry in that part of the country. Like you mentioned in your introductory remarks, the level of banditry in the northwest is so high. And so especially the defense headquarters introduced Operation Fansang Yema to address that. In the Niger Delta, we saw an intensification of operations to end oil theft with significant results. Early this year, we were producing about 900,000 barrels of oil per day. But as of now, I think we're producing about 1.3 million. And I think our OPEC target is about 1.6 million. So there has been improvement, but of course it's work in progress. And then with the additional demand from the Dangote refinery, it means even the 1.3, it's not enough. We need to surpass that 1.6 so that we can accommodate local demand like that of the Dangote refinery. And then in the southeast, where the secessionist agitation has been ongoing, the activities of especially Simon Ekpa, who is Finland-based, kind of dominated the year. On several occasions, he issued statements calling on the so-called sit-at-home on Monday, or several other instances where he would ask his followers to attack either government security forces or traditional rulers. But the good news is towards the end of the year, he was arrested in Finland, and he's currently in detention, and I think he's going to be tried for several offenses. And then, of course, if we look at the northeast, where the 2 major terrorist groups, that's the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah, Lil Dawat Wal Jihad, and the Islamic State in West Africa province have been active. Like you indicated in your opening remarks, there has been a resurgence, and what is even more worrisome is the introduction of new methodologies in their attack. Towards the end of the year, we saw them using drones that are, locally fabricated in an attempt to attack military formations. The same thing in the Northwest, where we saw the emergence of the Lakurawa group and their use of IEDs. So in summary, this is like the general overview of the year. In terms of security governance, one of the major issues that we have seen, which is also a continuation of previous years, is the lack of accountability within the security sector. Just like in previous years, a lot of security lapses will occur, but there hasn't been anyone held accountable in 2024. Instances of abduction, I think the most prominent one was in Kaduna State, where school children were abducted. And till date, no one has been held accountable. We're told that the police formation in that town was closed down just before the abduction, and no one has been held accountable, and several other instances of that. The other element of accountability is also financial accountability, where, of course, as you probably are aware, security enjoys the highest budgetary provision. In 2024, the budgetary provision for security was about 3.25 trillion naira, the highest single for any sector, more than health, more than infrastructure, more than education. And then in 2025, the budgeted allocation is about 4.9 trillion, also higher than any other single sector. And yet there is no accountability. In the president's media chat, he was asked if he was going to probe his security chief, and he said clearly he wouldn't. And I mean, that's fine. I don't expect him to probe them. They are people he trusts. But within the system, there should be accountability elements. There are two departments within most of the security ministries. The Planning, Research and Statistics Department, that should be strengthened in terms of their capability for oversight. Then, of course, the audit department, those two, that department too should be strengthened so that they can follow this money and make sure that the money is used for the purpose for which it was budgeted for. Then, of course, the role of the National Assembly in oversight functions. Again, in 2024, we didn't see any improvement in terms of the oversight function by the National Assembly. Rather, I mean, the most recent that people can relate to is the bombing in Sokoto, where communities were bombed and about 10 people died. Till date, we haven't had a single statement from the National Assembly. I mean, the argument may be that they are in recess, but that does not stop them from issuing statements and perhaps even setting up a committee to look into that. So all of these are elements of accountability that we haven't seen any change in 2024.
All right. Basically, I wanted to ask about challenges, but you've covered the fact of this accountability. But apart from the accountability and, investigation, because we've seen the military come out to say they've done their own investigation and it was a secondary reaction, the explosion was a secondary that met those 10 people that led to their death. But what major challenge would you say when it comes to the security organization in Nigeria in 2024?
Funding would be the usual complaint. Most of the security sector organizations will tell you they are not adequately funded. I personally don't necessarily agree. If you don't have accountability elements within you and you keep on complaining that there is a funding deficit, meanwhile people kind of see what happens in terms of the lifestyle of some of the leadership within that sector, even within the committee chairman of the security sector committees in the National Assembly, how they live, large lives, buy big houses, build hotels and all of that, send their children abroad to school and all of that. So it suggests, for instance, that there are leakages within the system. And even the president admitted to this in the media chat where he identified leakages and said he's working on blocking those leakages. So there are concerns regarding how monies are being used. So that's number one, the funding challenge, which needs to be looked critically because it may not necessarily be a funding challenge, but rather a challenge of misappropriation of the funding. Of course, the other one is equipment repository. In modern day warfare, equipment, especially technology, is paramount. And in the case of Nigeria, you hear that we don't have enough personnel. There are no enough boots on ground. In the case of the military, they are spread across the 36 states of the Federation and then city Abuja. There is no state where you don't see the military in one or the other form of operation. So they are stretched in reality. And where they don't have enough equipment, then their ability to meet the demands, is hampered. And so that's one huge challenge, this equipment repository. The other one is the interoperability, which means the ability of all the security sectors organization to work together as one. There are about 29 of them, and the objective of these 29 of them is mentioned in section 14, subsection B of the Constitution, which is the protection of the lives and property of the law-abiding Nigeria. Where they don't work together, then it will be very difficult for them to protect this life and property as stated in section 14, subsection 2. Like I said, there are 29 of them. Just to give you an example of our borders, it's not a hidden factor that our borders are porous. Now, the primary organizations that have responsibility for border protection are the immigration and the customs. But you rarely hear the discussions around the role of these two organizations in security. And as long as we don't improve the role of these two organizations, then we'll continue to have this security challenge. If we only put pressure on the military, that means the action is actually reactionary. We wait for these weapons to come into the country, and then they are in the hands of those who shouldn't have them. They are attacking innocent Nigerians, and then we're trying to stop them. But if we strengthen border control, border management, and reduce the proliferation of these small arms and light weapons, then our approach would be preventive, and it'd probably be more effective. So that's one major challenge, this difficulty in interoperability. Another example I'll give you is the procurement of drones. For quite some time now, a lot of the security organizations have been buying drones, but there is no national plan for the acquisition of these drones. So it now makes it very difficult for interoperability between the various, even within the defense headquarters, between the Air Force and the Army, the possibility that the types of drones the Army has and the type of drones the Air Force has are different, and then of course the Navy. So for them to now have a joint operation where all of these drones can work together in an interoperable manner, it's almost impossible. And then when you now expand it to the other organizations, the police has drones, and I think also the immigration, and maybe even the customs. So this is another challenge, unfortunately, and this is rooted in what is called security sector governance, where as a nation, we have not sat down to look at all these 29 organizations that are within the security sector and say this is how they should be coordinated. A challenge perhaps of the coordinating elements within the security sector, the Office of the National Security Advisor, the Ministers of Defense, Ministers of Police, Ministers of Interior, they are the ones who should manage the interoperability of these various organizations. But what we've seen in 2024 is them being more interested in operations more than coordination. So coordination is suffering at the moment, actually.
Yeah. I'm talking about how there seemed to be not too much synergy between these agencies. We saw how that happened last year, talking about 2023. It was at the worst level where agencies were clashing openly, and it was causing more chaos than bringing the country together. But this year was a bit calm, but definitely the synergy is still missing, and a lot needs to be done. But let's talk about this Lakurawa attack. In your points where you were addressing the issue, you said we tend to wait for things to happen first before we take measures. So based on the emergence of this Lakurawa group and what has happened so far, because of this emergence, they've caused a lot of mayhem and chaos, and it even led to our own military mistakenly killing 10 civilians. What do you think should be the measures to work in fighting this counter-terrorism to address this issue and not allow groups to keep coming up when it comes to terrorism and insurgency?
So I want to make it emphatically clear that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have the tools to address the emergence of any terrorist groups within the country. We have three tools. The first one is our National Counterterrorism Strategy, what is called NAC test. NAC test was introduced in 2016, and the custodian of that document is the Office of the National Security Advisor, specifically the Coordinator Counterterrorism. It's an office within that office. He is the custodian of that document, and again, because it's national, the philosophy behind it is that it should be national. Unfortunately, what we saw is that a significant percentage of the implementation of that document is done in the Northeast. For some reasons, we did not spread the implementation across the country. And perhaps you are in the media, you can approach that office and ask them why they did not extend it to the northwest of the country, when we are very aware that with developments in the Sahel and incursion of some of these terrorist groups into Nigeria, that it was just a matter of time before we start seeing radical groups like the Lakurawas. The second document, which is also important, is what is called the Policy Framework on Countering Violent Extremism. That's PCVE document. It was introduced in 2017, and it's meant to address the drivers and root causes of terrorism. Things like socioeconomic conditions, radicalization, poverty, name them, all those root causes that allow terrorism to occur. Now, the third document or law is the Terrorism Prohibition and Prevention Act as amended 2022. Now this, as you know, this law defines what terrorism is. It identifies what action or act is terroristic. It defines the financing of terrorism, and it also provides for the legal framework for addressing terrorism. Now, if you put these three documents together, they are meant to achieve 5 things. The first thing is to forestall terrorism from occurring. The second thing is to prevent terrorism from occurring, to identify terrorist acts, to ensure that those terrorist acts don't occur. And then the last one is to implement preventive measures in the area of counterterrorism. Now, that's why I say we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to, especially for the National Assembly, to come in and look critically at why these three documents are not being implemented across the country, especially in the northern half. And I identified the northern half because the Sahel region has a lot of terrorist groups. And those terrorist groups are active. They are engaging with other groups, including bandits and other criminal groups operating in the northwest and northeast, as well as north central parts of the country. So if we put in place the provisions of these three documents, we'll be able to, in the first place, identify whenever a group becomes radicalized, because the challenge is the radicalization of the group. The Lakurawa group has existed as far back as 1992. That's when we first heard of the Lakurawa group. And at that time, they were not radicalized. They became radicalized a few years ago. And it's possibly because of their engagement with groups in the Sahel region, such as the ISGS, name them, several groups that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State that are active in the Sahel region. They became radicalized through that. So if we had picked up at the point when they became radicalized, that is when we should have stepped in to arrest the ones we can arrest, go after them, kill the ones that we need to kill. But we didn't do that, unfortunately, and we're where we are. So again, I want to emphasize, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to implement the provisions of these three documents that I've mentioned.
All right, let's talk about this external factor. I mean, you've already started addressing the things happening, insecurity, instability happening in the Sahel regions that is literally affecting Nigeria. Currently, we are seeing the back and forth between Nigerian government and even the Nigerian government, where there's accusation of security instabilization, just shaky. What is your take on that, and how can we avert, a disturbing insecurity that is just waiting to happen or continue?
First off, our foreign policy needs to be made clear to us. As a student of international relations, I used to know that the centerpiece of our foreign policy is, first off, our citizens, and then the second level is our immediate neighbors. In other words, by that foreign policy objective, there is no other component in the world that is as important as our immediate neighbors. So it seems to me that this current administration may have changed this foreign policy objective. And I say this with all sense of responsibility. First off, all our neighbors, in fact, not just in the Sahel region, but even further down, as far as Chad, they are moving away from France. But we, on the other hand, are moving closer to France. So if the centerpiece of our foreign policy is our neighbors, and they have taken a position, and then we have now taken a counter position, so what is our foreign policy objective? Has that neighborliness that we used to drive, has it changed? I mean, and believe me, I'm not questioning the position of the government. It's not in my place to question what stance the government takes. My position as a patriotic citizen is to support my government, but my government needs to make it clear to me what the foreign policy objective is so that I can support that foreign policy objective. At the moment, that foreign policy objective has not been made clear to Nigerians. Of course, recently, the president visited France. He was given a state welcome, one of the highest for any African leader. We also know there are, military cooperations between Nigeria and France. And our neighboring countries are seeing that they are distancing themselves away from France while we are moving closer to France. So naturally, they will be uncomfortable with, what is happening. And I think the statement coming from the Nigerian junta leader, General Chani, is actually a depiction of that. He's been uncomfortable with our stance towards France. Now, having said that, I personally believe that some of the allegations are ridiculous. I don't think there's any iota of truth in them. I think he himself knows that the allegations are not factual. He is making them in pursuit of an objective. It's a propaganda objective. His administration has been lying on the loyalty of Nigerians. In other words, the more he criticizes France, and the more his popularity increases. So every time he has an opportunity to criticize France, he would criticize them, because that is really the legitimacy that his government has on the basis of his criticism of France. A lot of Nigerians are not happy with France. And so we've given him the tool by our association with France, and he's taking advantage. Now the question is, how should we respond? Should the response be the kind of statements I've heard from at least 3 ministers? The NSA has issued an interview, the Ministers of Information, the Minister of Defense, and I think has given interviews and has categorically indicated that we are not in any way in any defense cooperation in France. Now, neither do they have any base in any part of Nigeria. Now, that for me is not enough. That is responsive. As the bigger brother, and we are the bigger brother to Niger, there is no ramification that you would compare us. In terms of resources, in terms of population, in terms of strategic importance, we are the bigger brother. We should drive the narrative. Okay. He is driving his own narrative. Like I said, he's using our closeness to France to sell a narrative, which is that France is setting up a base to attack his country, and his citizens would listen to him. But what should be our own strategic objective? If you ask me, our strategic objective, just like we started, is to restore democracy in that country. Until date, that junta has not released a transition time frame. Why shouldn't we be talking about it? So for me, in terms of the strategic objective of our relationship and our communications, we've not done very well. And I'm hoping that both the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Office of the National Security Advisor would take note of this. We should not be reactive. We should drive the narrative. We should give him the opportunity to perhaps provide evidence in support of these spurious allegations that he has made. And if he doesn't do it, let's use the media to show to the world that, look, we've given him the opportunity, he has not provided, so that at the end of the day, the media sees this man as unstable and emotional, and without the ability really to govern, as it were, and put pressure on him to put out a transition time frame, so that from there, at least an election will be held, and that country returns to democracy. If we don't do this, my worry is we should look at the bigger picture. The Sahelian countries, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad, we're likely to see more presence of Russia in that country. And if we maintain our relationship with France, which I believe we're going to, then I'm very, very worried that a proxy kind of war, maybe not an open war, but some form of proxy conflict may emerge in that region, which will not help us in any way. There is a lot of suggestion that has already started. Even the Lakurawa, there are some people that believe it's a conspiracy theory to allow some form of insecurity in the region and deny economic benefits to those countries. I don't want to go into that conspiracy theory, but it's there. And so we need to take action and lead the narrative in such a manner that we put him under pressure.
All right. Doctor, before we let you go, there is one concern when it comes to, security intervention. We saw what happened, I think last year, December, in Plateau State, where there was, a whole week of communal clashes, and it was a bit of a slow effort from the security agencies to get to that place. We saw train attack that happened in March this year, and also how it was a bit slow for security agents to go there. Now, talking about routes and map and ways, how do you think best that come 2025 there should be an improvement in that aspect?
So modern day warfare demands a light and speedy deployment of resources, as it were. We should have a tactical squad in all our security agencies, particularly the military and the police, that have the capability for speedy deployment. In my audit of security functions in 2024, this is the #1 challenge that we have as a country: inability to deploy speedily. In modern day warfare, that ability to deploy should not be more than 15 minutes. So there is no part of the country where we shouldn't be able to deploy within 15 minutes. Even if it's 1 a.m. and there is an occurrence, we should be able to deploy to that location in less than 15 minutes. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. So I'm hoping that in 2025, this is one area that we should look closely at. We have formations across the country, whether military or police formations. Remember earlier on, we're talking about interoperability. For us to achieve this rapid deployment, our communication system has to be effective. As a citizen, I should be able to call the 199 or 122 line, and once it is confirmed that there is an issue, then deployment should take place immediately. Lagos has gone very far in this regard.
Yeah.
Lagos has an emergency response unit, and they are able to do that. Time will not allow me to go into how Lagos manages it, but this is the way to go. We should strengthen that communication capability. We should make sure through simulation exercises by our military and our police that anyone who calls and the person is in distress, then we can get to that person in less than 15 minutes. And again, like I always say, the National Assembly can play that role through their oversight functions. When they sit with these organizations, they should ask them, what are you doing to enhance response capabilities, so that when a Nigerian is in distress and he makes a call, they can deploy speedily.
All right, a clearly insightful conversation here. Thank you so much, Dr. Kabir Adamu, for joining us this morning to address the security challenges. Hopefully next year when we get to converse with you, we get to hear positive, reform when it comes to our security sector. Appreciate you.
My pleasure. I look forward to that too.
Of course. And with that, of course, we wrap up this segment of Daybreak. Hope it was really insightful on what is happening. And we're hoping the National Assembly, based on the security expert analysis, gets to take on, that responsibility on their shoulder to do more come next year.